This is a companion to the previous video I made where I performed Froberger Suite in C minor in meantone temperament. In that video I mentioned that my decision to perform the piece in meantone could be seen as an extreme one because most recordings that you will find do not actually use meantone as a temperament for this piece. The reason behind it being, of course, that in C minor, A flat and E flat are part of the key signature, but those two pitches actually produce a wolf fifth. So what happens is, of course, the temperament is modified somehow to make sure that that wolf fifth does not exist. My reasoning for playing the piece in meantone has to do with the fact that I think, personally at least, this is the only way that the full expressive content of the piece is brought to life. However, what I thought I would do in this video is kind of show you, by way of contrast, what happens when we actually do modify meantone a little bit and we decide to perform the piece in a slightly milder temperament. So I will explain a little bit what I'm doing. I will show you the difference between meantone temperament and the temperament that I normally use, which is a Rameau temperament. And then at the end, I'm going to perform also two of the, let's say, more objectionable movements from that suite. Objectionable in the sense that they are the ones where that A flat and the wolf fifth come more into play, so that you have more jarring moments in them. This is the Almond and the Sarabande. And because you've already seen these pieces or you've heard them with the score, in this video I will actually perform them, let's say, live. So you will actually see me playing the pieces. So let's look a little bit at these two temperaments. Before I do that, let's talk a little bit about how you modify meantone, because of course there are going to be different ways of doing it, and it all depends on what a composer or a musician, what they want to do, what they want to achieve, and what they want to express. And although, again, I have to generalize a little bit, I would say that there are different trends that we see from the 17th century and going towards the 18th century and in the 18th century regarding what to do and how, in many respects, solve the issue of having this wolf fifth and being able to use more tonalities without that limitation. As I explained in the previous video, it's not a limitation if you want to use it expressively, but if you want to use more tonalities anyway, you need to have other options. So one thing I would say is that if you look at what French musicians and theorists are doing, and of course the Rameau temperament I'm using belongs in this category, what they will do is they seem to really like those pure major thirds, but they realize that you can't have as many major thirds, as many pure major thirds, without sacrificing something. So what they decide to do in order to have more tonalities available to them without having to deal with the wolf fifth is to spread the wolf a little bit. And the way you do this is you try to distribute it more evenly within the fifths. This also means that you have to sacrifice the purity of some thirds. So you don't have as many major thirds pure anymore. If you look to Germany, what you will see is that musicians and theorists are taking a different approach where we're dealing with a mixture of pure and impure perfect fifths. And then, of course, this means that usually the major thirds are almost never pure anymore. What happens with these two approaches is that the results are slightly different. With the French approach, what happens is, yes, you have more keys available than meantone, but still there are going to be certain tonalities that are either not completely playable or, shall we say, sometimes a little too spicy. With the German approach, we're getting to what we call a circulating unequal temperament or a well temperament. And what this is a temperament that allows you to play in every tonality. Think of Bach's well-tempered clavier. And what happens is you still retain key color. Now, they're not going to be those circulating unequal temperaments are not necessarily going to be as flavorful as some of the French temperaments. However, you can play in every key, but you still retain some sort of color because not all the intervals are exactly the same. The Rameau temperament that I'm using, as I mentioned, belongs a little bit more to the French tradition. And what we have here is a temperament where instead of 8 pure major thirds, we have 4. So Rameau is going to distribute the wolf a little bit more evenly among the fifths. And I would say that in many respects, if I were to kind of give you a very simple idea of what the difference is, in the previous video I mentioned that with meantone, enharmonics don't really exist. So every black key, or in this keyboard every white key, has one and only one name. So this is your G sharp and this is your E flat. And the G sharp is not an A flat, it is only a G sharp. So try to imagine that while with the Rameau temperament we still don't really have enharmonics exactly. What happens is that with this temperament and with other temperaments of this type of approach, what happens is we kind of rearrange a little bit the white keys, at least on this keyboard, the accidentals, we rearrange them a little bit more so they're not so extremely in one direction or another. And you can tell if I were to play, notice for instance the lower manual is tuned to Rameau, the upper manual is tuned to quarter comma meantone. Notice that if I were to play the C in either keyboard, they sound the same. But if I start playing the accidentals, then you can see the difference. And here is the G sharp A flat. So think of this Rameau temperament almost as a temperament where the natural keys are pretty much tuned the same as in meantone, but we kind of rearrange the way the accidental keys are tuned. And this is basically the difference here. So if you play the natural keys, you will see that they're pretty much the same. If you play the accidental keys, then there are these extreme sometimes differences. So how is this going to affect now the Froberger suite? Well, what's going to happen is, and actually this is one of the reasons that I like this Rameau temperament, what's going to happen is that some of the more jarring moments are not going to be there anymore. However, you are still going to have a lot of color. It's the kind of color that I think you would not get if you were to use some kind of a circulating unequal temperament. And of course, if you look back through my videos, you will see that I actually use this Rameau temperament even for 18th century repertory, even for Bach. I wouldn't do the entire well-tempered clavier in it, but I can do quite a lot. It's a flexible temperament, but obviously after a certain point, it can't handle every single tonality. So what happens here is that some of these more jarring moments are going to become a little softer, but you still retain color. Let me give you an example. The opening of the Almond, if I were to play it in meantone, so the upper keyboard, and of course that's what it sounded like in the previous video, sounds something like this. And notice that here the jarring moments really occur when the subject of this piece goes up to the A flat. And I'm not playing trills just to keep the intervals, so you can really hear all the intervals. Now, notice what happens if I do the same thing with the Rameau temperament. So suddenly now what happens is we kind of have an A flat again. A flat is not the most melodious tonality in Rameau temperament, but you actually do have an A flat, whereas here you don't. So now we can actually listen to the subject, and this kind of jarring has changed to this. So there is a difference. The same thing happens with the Sarabande. So again, if I play the Sarabande in the two temperaments, you will notice that the jarring moments that involve the A flat are no longer really as jarring. On the other hand, and this is the reason that I still like the Rameau temperament quite a bit, you will notice that the chromaticism is still quite pronounced and quite flavorful, because of course half steps are still not equidistant in the Rameau temperament. They are a little less extreme than in meantone, but there's still a lot of flavor. So this is now the opening of the Sarabande, first in meantone temperament. And if I play the same thing now in Rameau, so not as jarring, not as extreme, but you still have quite a lot of color. Now, what I would say again, my personal opinion is that I really like quarter comma meantone in this. There is still something missing with the Rameau temperament. However, what I wanted to do is kind of give you the option to hear both versions. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be playing the Almond and the Sarabande because those are the two more extreme movements, or the ones that produce the more extreme moments of dissonance. So you can make up your own mind which one you prefer and see what you think again, or maybe you like both, I don't know. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the performances.